Peg and I, we have noticed about each other that we are forgetting more things. I don't know if that's happening to anybody else. But we decided that we would go to the doctor to see if there was anything that could be helped with us. And the doctor said, no, this is probably just a normal thing that's going on. And what you might need to do is, why don't you write little notes to help yourselves. So when we got home, she says, hey, will you go to the kitchen and get me a bowl of ice cream? And I said, sure, I'll do that. She goes, well, don't you think you ought to write that down? I said, no, I don't need to write that down. I know I can remember a bowl of ice cream, for goodness sakes. And she said, oh, and I'd like some strawberries and whipped cream on that too. I said, okay, yeah, that sounds great. Are you going to write that down? I don't need to write it down. It's a bowl of ice cream, some strawberries, and some whipped cream. This is easy. This is easy. So I go off into the kitchen, and she hears banging and crashing of pots and pans and so forth down the line. And then a little while later, I come back with a plate of bacon and eggs. And she looks at that, and she looks at me, and she says, what about the toast I told you to get me? Did that really happen? All right. It could have. I share this story with you because I have a difficult time remembering what I had for dinner last night, and I think I'm not alone in this, and I don't expect anyone to remember the messages of the past month, so I want to remind us, and then I'd like to try and tie it up with a nice little wedge blade bow. On January 6th, we began the series of Experiencing Community by asking the question, what is the future that we want to create together? And this is the question that I want us to keep in front of us as we go through our visioning process. I want this question to be asked at every meeting. I want this question to guide the conversations of our board, our staff, our choir, our knitting group, our facilities team, Keystones, every group that's a part of Shadow Rock. What is the future we want to create together? And please note, the question is about the future we want, given the world we are in. It is not a question about how we recreate the past in the world as it was. On January 13th, I invited us to flip our thinking. I encouraged us to see through the story of Jesus and the blind man and the metaphorical blindness of the disciples that we can shift from the spirituality of problem solving, which is the spirituality of our culture, into the spirituality of possibility. That our challenges are not problems to be solved, but are opportunities to be lived in. On January 20th, we were blessed with the songs and the stories of Pablo Peregrina. He shared songs and stories about the border. I encouraged us to see the geographic border as more than a physical location. The border is liminal space where everything and every time is up for grabs, and it represents an in-between, not quite settled reality. Poets and artists are the best guides through such times and such spaces. As we navigate our own in-between time as a congregation, I would encourage us to look to the poets and the artists among us, as well as the engineers and the business people. Together, we will be able to keep in front of us a comprehensive view of life that will guide us into a bright future. And lastly, we have last week. Last week, we were blessed with the presence of one of our founders, Reverend Robin Kreider. She helped write our covenant, and she taught the classes of theology that are the foundation of our covenant and our identity. We celebrate her work and her legacy. We are a part of that legacy. And last week, we also did an important work together. We talked, shared, and submitted our thoughts on a vision statement. And you did good work, and I thank you for your work. The world changes. The people in the pews change. The minister changes. What remains constant is the vision that we are the sensitive and responsive ones discerning God's work in the midst of history. And based on that discernment, we jump into the world and partner with God to make the kingdom of peace and justice a reality in the here and now. And so, here are the guidelines. Ask often of each other, what is the future we want to create together? Adopt a spirituality of possibility. Keep a process of developing a comprehensive view of life. In a spirit of gratitude and hope, move into the future because God is a God of history and is already in the future, pulling us to God's loving self. Now, we have a tough cultural mindset to break through. We have walls of privatism, individualism, and consumerism around our hearts and our minds. And these walls shape our convictions and expectations about life, spirituality, the groups we belong to, and each other. The paradox is that when spirituality is at its best, it is never about ourselves, nor is it about the individual. At its best and at its deepest practice, spirituality is about us and all of creation. I want to point out a new quilt that is on the wall. Take a look over here, quilt of the wedge blade. And I want to thank Linda Johnston for this beautiful work. Thank you. Let's thank her for it. How many? And it's elegant and it's beautiful, and there is, in some ways it may seem simple, but let me tell you, there was a lot of geometry that went into that confounded her and Peter, but they figured it out. Because in that quilt are all these little squares, and that wedge blade, those angles, do not cut through those squares at exactly and precise ways. It is complicated. It was a bear. It was a bear. It is a quilt of the symbol of the identity and the brand and the vision and the mission of Shadow Rock. It is a symbol of a profound theological concept that opens us up to a lot of discussion. The complexity of the concept and its nuances serve us very well, because what it does is it allows us to plug into its truth at different times in our own lives. The theological concept is high, wide, and deep enough to allow all of us, whatever season of life we're in, allow all of us to relate to it. It is complex, comprehensive, and relatable because it is not a stagnant idea or a thing. It is a process. The point of the wedge blade is the point of the wedge blade. at this point is the paramount truth of Christian narrative. This place right here, this place right here is also captured in the biblical narrative. At the end of the narrative of the Bible is a proclamation. Behold, God makes all things new. All things new. Your life, your family, your neighborhood, your community, our nation, our church, our world. And you want to know what that newness looks like? It looks like your deepest desires and your greatest needs are being met. It looks like hungry people are not hungry anymore. It looks like people who crave for justice get justice. It looks like people, individuals, families, and nations that are in desperate need of healing have healing. Behold, I make all things new. It's easy, and yet from this simple and profound truth comes all the discussions and the need for individual and corporate study. New for who? New for what purpose? What is my role in this work of a new creation? What is Shadow Rock's role? Are all of our structures and roles and plans and work and study and prayer and play reinforcing this process of newness? And yes, it's okay to ask, is the promise of a new creation for me? Perhaps even with tears streaming down your face. We ask this question because we're so steeped in our culture and the walls of individualism and consumerism. And the answer is yes. Newness is for you too. You're not alone. However, the good news of the new creation is first about the renewal of the whole. It is not renewal of the world, one person at a time. It is renewal of the whole mess and our renewal within it. Love of God, love of neighbor, renewal of ourselves are interwoven in the very fabric of creation itself. In its renewal, we find our healing. I am renewed not when I serve myself, but when I serve others. I am renewed not when I hoard, but when I share. I am renewed not when I dominate and manipulate others, but love them. And this is the true capital, the wealth that does not rust or eaten up by moss. This is the capital, the wealth which builds a new world. It is the capital of the wedge blade. It is the wealth of the wedge blade. It is the process of the wedge blade. The cross is our prophetic source. It says that love is poured out to all the world. And the wedge blade is the prophetic outcome when we move through this world with such love. The capital of the wedge blade is the capital of hope and the promise of the future. Amen.